Daniel and Laura Jackson seemed like the perfect family. Their children, Emma and Ryan, were the picture of innocence. But one small note left by 10-year-old Emma would ignite a darkness inside Daniel that no one could have imagined, turning a peaceful vacation into a nightmare that would shock an entire town. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. The Jackson family lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Florida, a place where everyone knew each other's routines and greeted one another with polite smiles. From the outside, they looked like a perfect family. Daniel Jackson, 42, was an accountant with a steady job and a reputation for being responsible and reliable. He had a neatly trimmed beard, a calm voice, and the kind of presence that made people assume he was trustworthy. His wife Laura, 39, had been his high school sweetheart. She worked part-time at a local boutique and devoted most of her energy to the children. Their home was tidy, filled with framed family photos of smiling faces on vacations and holidays. To their neighbors, nothing seemed wrong. The Jacksons appeared happy, content, and successful. Emma, their 10-year-old daughter, was quiet and observant. She noticed things that others overlooked, the small tensions that lingered in the house when Daniel's mood shifted. Ryan, their 7-year-old son, was playful and innocent, often running through the yard, chasing a ball or playing with the family dog. He never suspected that the perfect life he knew could be shattered in an instant. Behind the facade, cracks were slowly forming. Daniel's temper, which rarely showed in public, simmered quietly at home. He often felt overwhelmed by the responsibilities of work and family, believing he wasn't living up to the standards he had set for himself. Laura tried to talk to him, but he would shrug off her concerns or retreat into silence, a storm brewing behind his calm exterior. At night he sometimes paced the living room, staring at the walls as though searching for a solution to a problem only he could see. Emma noticed these moments and felt a mix of fear and curiosity. She loved her father deeply, but she was also beginning to see a side of him that frightened her. Friends and neighbors remained oblivious. At weekend barbecues or school events, Daniel smiled, chatted politely, and laughed with the children, keeping the darkness well hidden. Laura, too, played her part, making sure no one suspected the tension that hung over their family dinners. In public, the Jacksons were enviable. Their home was immaculate, the children well-dressed, polite, and intelligent. They posted pictures online of trips to the beach or amusement parks, showing off the laughter of children who seemed carefree and loved. But Emma's sharp eyes noticed the silent signs. The way her father's jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking. The sudden flashes of irritation when Ryan asked too many questions. The cold stare he sometimes directed at Laura when she disagreed with him. She began to understand, in ways too heavy for a 10-year-old, that appearances could be deceiving. There was a storm brewing beneath the surface of their lives, one that no one else seemed to see. As summer approached, Daniel began planning a family vacation, insisting it would be the perfect escape. He wanted everyone together, away from work and school, to reconnect as a family. Laura was excited, imagining laughter-filled days by a lake, while Emma and Ryan eagerly packed their bags with swimsuits and games. But Emma carried with her a quiet unease, a sense that the vacation could not wash away the tension she felt at home. She sensed that something inside her father was fragile, unpredictable, and that their family's perfect image might be closer to breaking than anyone realized. It was early July when Daniel announced the family vacation. He had found a secluded lakeside cabin in the Appalachian Mountains, a place far from the noise of the city, where they could spend a week together. Laura was thrilled. She imagined long walks by the lake, quiet evenings by a fire, and the children laughing without the distractions of school and chores. Ryan jumped at the idea, thinking of swimming in the lake and catching fish, while Emma felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. Something about the sudden intensity in her father's voice made her pause, but she tried to shake it off, convincing herself it was just excitement. Packing for the trip was a chaotic mix of laughter and minor arguments. Laura reminded Daniel to bring extra clothes, Ryan kept misplacing his toys, and Emma carefully packed her journal, pencils, and a small camera she loved to carry. As they loaded the car, neighbors waved and wished them a good trip, none of them suspecting the tension lingering in the Jackson household. Daniel smiled politely, nodded at the neighbors, and carried bags to the car. To an outsider, everything seemed normal, cheerful even, but Emma couldn't ignore the way her father's hands trembled slightly when he adjusted the straps of a suitcase. During the drive, the family played games to pass the time. Laura tried to keep the mood light, telling stories about their previous vacations, while Ryan sang loudly from the back seat. Daniel remained quiet, focused on the road, occasionally glancing at his family in the rearview mirror with an unreadable expression. Emma sat silently, her eyes scanning her father's face, sensing the tension beneath the surface. She knew something was brewing inside him, something darker than irritation or stress, though she couldn't put it into words. That night, as they settled into the cabin, Emma watched her father pace the living room. The cabin was cozy, with wooden walls, a stone fireplace, and a view of the lake, shimmering under the moonlight. Laura unpacked the children's clothes while Ryan explored the small cabin, excitedly pointing out where he would sleep. Emma felt a growing need to act, a desire to protect her family from the storm she sensed in her father. Quietly, she wrote a note, small enough to fit in his wallet, hoping it might reach him in a way words spoken aloud could not. She told him she loved him, reminded him of the family's bond, and pleaded with him not to do anything he might regret. The note ended simply, with a child's fear and honesty. "We are scared sometimes, but we love you." She slipped the folded paper into his wallet while he was distracted in the kitchen, and then tried to act normally. For the rest of the evening she watched him closely, hoping he would read it and calm down. Daniel seemed unaware of the note's presence, but Emma's anxiety grew. She noticed the way he stared at the lake outside, hands gripping the back of a chair, jaw tight, and lips pressed together. A chill ran down her spine. The family had come to the mountains seeking peace and happiness, but Emma already felt the shadows creeping closer, threatening the safety of everything she held dear. The cabin was quiet as night fell, with only the sounds of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. Emma lay awake, clutching her pillow, her mind racing with a mixture of hope and dread. She didn't know if the note would work, if her father would see it as a warning or an accusation, but she knew she had tried. Outside, the lake reflected the moonlight, calm and serene, a stark contrast to the storm building inside the man she loved. The morning after their arrival at the cabin, Daniel woke before anyone else. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. He moved quietly to the kitchen, making coffee, his mind restless and crowded with thoughts. It was then that he noticed the folded paper tucked inside his wallet. He pulled it out slowly, unaware that the small piece of paper could change everything. The handwriting was familiar, neat, careful, and unmistakably Emma's. As he unfolded the note, a strange silence filled the cabin. The words were short, almost childlike, yet their meaning struck him with an unexpected force. Emma expressed her fear, her love, and her quiet warning. She wrote that the family was scared of him sometimes, and begged him not to do anything rash. Her words, meant to reach his heart and remind him of the love they shared, instead ignited something dark inside him. He stared at the paper, gripping it tightly until the edges crumpled in his hands. The note sat heavily in his mind. For hours, Daniel wandered the cabin, reading and rereading the words. He remembered every smile, every argument, every moment he thought he had failed his family. The note, innocent and pure, seemed to mock him in his own eyes. He felt trapped, as if the walls of the cabin were closing in. Each time he looked at the lake outside, the serene water reflected the chaos he felt inside. Emma's words were supposed to calm him, but they had the opposite effect, stirring a storm of anger, fear, and confusion that he couldn't control. Meanwhile, Laura and the children moved through the cabin unaware of the tension building. Laura hummed softly as she unpacked, arranging clothes and belongings. Ryan raced around with his toy boat, pretending the kitchen was a river. Emma stayed close to the window, her eyes occasionally flicking to her father. She noticed the change in his posture, the way his shoulders tensed, and the distant look in his eyes. A cold feeling settled in her stomach, an instinctive warning that something was very wrong. She tried to hide her fear, but her heart pounded in her chest. As the day wore on, Daniel became more withdrawn. He avoided conversation, speaking only when necessary, his mind consumed by the note. The words "we are scared" sometimes repeated in his thoughts, like a relentless echo. He felt cornered, as if the note had exposed every flaw, every failure, every weakness he had tried to hide. His anger, which had been simmering quietly for years, boiled over. The father who had smiled and played with his children in public now felt like a stranger to himself, consumed by a sudden, uncontrollable rage. Evening fell, casting long shadows across the cabin and the surrounding forest. The family gathered for dinner, but the atmosphere was strained. Daniel's eyes moved constantly, darting from Emma to Laura to Ryan, and then back to the note he carried with him. In that quiet tension, the note had already done what Emma never intended. It had triggered a darkness that would soon turn the cabin into a scene of horror. What was meant as a warning, a plea for safety, had become a spark that lit the tinder of a troubled mind. The calm of the mountains, the serene lake, and the laughter of children now stood on the edge of an unimaginable tragedy. The first evening in the cabin passed quietly, or at least it appeared so on the surface. Laura tried to keep the mood light, preparing dinner while Ryan played near the fireplace with his toy trucks, humming happily. Emma sat at the edge of the table, watching her father closely, feeling a tension in the air that she couldn't shake. Daniel moved around the cabin in an unusual rhythm, not speaking much, pausing often to stare out the window at the darkening trees and the calm lake beyond. The shadows from the setting sun stretched across the wooden floors, making the room feel smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Emma noticed the first real change when Daniel picked up a kitchen knife, not to cook, but to examine it with a strange intensity. He held it carefully, inspecting the blade under the dim light, almost as if it were a tool of some distant, hidden purpose. She felt her chest tighten. Ryan, unaware of the silent warning, continued to laugh and play, while Laura hummed softly, oblivious to the growing tension. Emma wanted to speak up, to warn her mother, but a strange fear rooted her to the chair. She understood that whatever had been building inside her father was now stronger, more unpredictable. As the night deepened, Daniel's behavior became more erratic. He walked from room to room, sometimes standing still for long stretches, staring at nothing in particular. Emma tried to focus on her journal, but her eyes kept darting toward him, noting every twitch, every shift in posture. The father she knew seemed to have disappeared behind a mask of quiet fury. The calm, cheerful man from the car ride and family outings had been replaced by someone cold, distant, and impossible to predict. By the time Laura suggested they all go to bed, the cabin felt heavy with unspoken tension. Daniel nodded without speaking, his movements deliberate and controlled, yet edged with a sharpness that made Emma's heart pound. She sensed that something had changed permanently, that the note she had left in his wallet had set off a chain reaction beyond her control. The air seemed thick, pressing down on the family, making every small sound, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of Ryan's toy boat feel louder, sharper, more alarming. Later, when the children lay in their beds, Emma watched her father from the doorway. Daniel sat in the living room, staring at the flickering shadows cast by the fireplace. His fingers traced the edges of the note he still held, his expression unreadable but intense. The quiet tick of the clock was almost unbearable, echoing through the cabin as Emma realized with a chilling clarity that he was no longer the father she had known. The love she had always felt in his embrace now mingled with a fear she could not voice, a fear that gripped her chest and made her stomach churn. The night outside was calm, the wind whispering through the trees, the lake reflecting the moonlight in peaceful ripples. Inside, however, the cabin was a prison of anticipation. Daniel's silent pacing, the tightened grip on the note, and the distant, blank stare into the shadows created an invisible tension that suffocated the family. Emma, though only 10, understood that the storm inside her father was about to break, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The serene mountains that had promised a joyful escape now loomed as a backdrop to a darkness that no one could escape. In the early hours of the third day, the cabin was enveloped in a deep, unnatural silence. The wind whispered softly through the trees outside, and the lake's surface shimmered faintly under the pale light of dawn. Inside, Daniel Jackson moved with a chilling precision, each step deliberate and calculated. The note he had found in his wallet, still clutched in his hand, seemed to fuel a fire inside him, twisting his thoughts into a dark and dangerous resolve. Emma had hoped it would make him pause, make him see reason, but instead, it had become a trigger, a spark that ignited an uncontrollable rage. Laura stirred slightly in her sleep, unaware of the danger looming. Ryan's soft breathing echoed in the small room, a sound that normally brought comfort to Daniel, now replaced by a strange tension. Daniel paused in the doorway, his eyes sweeping across the rooms where his family slept. For a fleeting moment, he remembered the happy memories, the laughter, the vacations, the ordinary, peaceful days. But those moments only seemed to mock him, reminding him of everything he believed he had failed to be. The attack was swift, a horrifying culmination of suppressed anger and distorted thoughts. By the time the sun's first light touched the cabin's windows, the Jackson family's lives had been extinguished. Laura, Emma, and Ryan were gone, leaving behind an atmosphere so heavy and unnatural that it seemed to linger even after the act itself. The cabin, once filled with warmth and laughter, became a place of silence, fear, and devastation. Outside, the lake remained serene, reflecting the early morning light in a cruel contrast to the horror within the cabin walls. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded among them. Daniel remained still for a long time, staring at the note he had carried, his mind numb yet strangely focused. The act he had committed was final, irreversible, and in that moment, a strange calm settled over him, as if the storm inside him had found an outlet. Later, when investigators would arrive, they would find only scattered clues. A family frozen in the last moments of their lives, the note clutched tightly in Daniel's hand, and the quiet remnants of ordinary life disrupted forever. There were no screams, no signs of struggle beyond the necessary, calculated movements he had made. It was a scene that spoke of careful planning mixed with uncontrollable impulse, a horrifying combination that left even seasoned law enforcement officers shaken. Emma's note, the small plea from her 10-year-old heart, remained untouched by remorse. What was intended as a warning, a reminder of love, had become a chilling symbol of innocence confronted by darkness. Daniel's actions were unthinkable, yet in his mind, they were justified by the distorted fears and anger that had been building inside him for years. The cabin, the lake, the quiet forest, everything that had promised escape, relaxation and family bonding, had instead become a setting for a nightmare that would haunt the community forever. By the time neighbors or friends would later notice the absence of the Jackson family, it was too late. The tragedy had already occurred, irreversible and devastating. Daniel had carried out an act that no one had anticipated, shattering the illusion of the perfect family. The quiet Appalachian morning, bathed in sunlight, hid the darkness that had exploded within the cabin, leaving behind only questions, horror, and a community struggling to comprehend the unimaginable. By mid-afternoon, concern began to ripple through the small town surrounding the Jacksons' home. Friends and neighbors had expected updates from the family, or at least a cheerful call to say they had arrived safely at the cabin. When no messages came, worry grew. A close friend, who had planned to visit the Jacksons that day, decided to check on them. As she approached the cabin, the forested road felt unusually quiet, the air heavy with a stillness that made her heart race. The first sign something was wrong hit before she even reached the door. The car was parked outside, untouched, but the cabin's door was slightly ajar. The sunlight streaming through the gap painted strange shadows across the wooden floorboards. She called out softly, expecting the children's laughter or Laura's familiar voice. Silence. The kind of silence that made her stomach tighten and her hands tremble. She tried the door, pushing it gently, and it creaked open further, revealing the interior. Inside, the cabin told a story too horrifying to believe at first glance. The normally cheerful space, filled with laughter and family warmth just days before, was now a place of deathly quiet. Objects were in place, yet the air was heavy, thick with a sense of something unnatural. The friend's eyes fell on the note lying on the counter, folded neatly, as if untouched since that morning. Its presence made the scene even more chilling. She dropped the words of the note from her memory, realizing that the message of innocence and love now existed as a haunting echo against the grim reality before her. Fear and panic set in. The friend immediately called the authorities, her voice shaky as she described the situation. Within minutes, police officers arrived, followed by forensic teams and investigators. The small, peaceful cabin transformed into a center of national attention, its walls bearing witness to a tragedy that seemed almost unreal. Officers moved cautiously, documenting every detail, photographing each scene, and collecting evidence. The stillness inside the rooms was suffocating, a silent testament to the horror that had occurred. When investigators examined the cabin more closely, the scope of the crime became horrifyingly clear. Laura, Emma, and Ryan had all been killed in a swift, calculated manner. The note clutched in Daniel's wallet provided a chilling insight into what may have triggered the attack. Officers pieced together the timeline, trying to understand how a vacation meant for family bonding could have ended in such an unimaginable tragedy. The calm serenity of the Appalachian Mountains outside, the lake, the trees and the quiet air, stood in cruel contrast to the horror inside the cabin. Neighbors gathered at a distance, whispering, shaken to their core. No one could comprehend how a man like Daniel, who had seemed devoted and reliable, could commit such an act. The community struggled to grasp the reality of the situation, while investigators worked tirelessly to collect evidence and piece together the final hours of the Jackson family. The note, the untouched toys, and the quiet remnants of ordinary life became symbols of innocence destroyed and lives abruptly ended. By evening, the investigation was underway in full force. Helicopters circled above the dense forest, officers blockaded the roads, and canine units began scanning the surrounding area. The search for Daniel had begun. The perfect image of a family vacation had been shattered, replaced by shock, grief, and a chilling reminder that appearances could be deadly illusions. The small cabin, once a symbol of escape and togetherness, now stood as a grim monument to an unthinkable tragedy that no one would ever forget. Daniel had fled the cabin before anyone could confront him. By the time the authorities arrived, he was gone, leaving behind only the chilling remnants of the Jackson family's lives. The dense Appalachian forest became his refuge, a shadowy maze of trees, rocks, and hidden trails where he could vanish from the world. He moved quickly, carrying the note in his pocket like a twisted talisman, its words echoing in his mind. Every step was deliberate, yet his mind was chaotic, consumed by the dark thoughts that had driven him to murder. The search for Daniel began immediately. Police officers fanned out through the forest, calling his name, while helicopters hovered above, scanning for any sign of movement. Canine units sniffed the ground, following faint traces of footprints that led deeper into the wilderness. The mountains, once a peaceful backdrop for a family vacation, now became a trap for the manhunt. Thick underbrush, narrow trails, and sudden cliffs made the pursuit dangerous for both the officers and the fugitive. Daniel moved like a ghost, slipping silently between the trees, careful to avoid snapping twigs or leaving a trail obvious to trackers. He felt a strange calm as he navigated the forest, the chaos of the past days fading into a singular focus on survival. The note, still in his pocket, burned against his leg with every step, reminding him of the trigger that had set off the unimaginable. It was both a symbol of his act and a constant companion in his flight, a connection to the family he had destroyed and the darkness he could not escape. For 3 tense days, the search continued. Officers combed every inch of the surrounding mountains, camping in the forest at night, scanning the terrain with flashlights and thermal imaging. News of the tragedy spread quickly, and the small town and neighboring communities were on edge. Families stayed indoors, children were warned to stay close, and the media descended on the area, broadcasting the manhunt live. Every reported sighting of Daniel sent waves of fear and anticipation through the community. Finally, after days of careful tracking, Daniel was discovered hiding in an abandoned shack, far from the main trails, tucked under the dense cover of trees and ivy. He had stripped down to minimize signs of movement, crouching low as though blending into the forest itself. When officers approached, he did not resist. He sat quietly, the note still clutched in his hand, muttering fragments of its words under his breath. His eyes were vacant, but there was a flicker of recognition as he realized the hunt was over. The arrest was swift. Daniel was handcuffed and led from the shack, his figure pale and gaunt from days without proper food or rest. The forest, which had been his hiding place, seemed to close in behind him as if reclaiming the darkness he had unleashed. Authorities transported him back to the town, where the reality of his actions would finally face scrutiny. The Jackson family was gone, and the mountains, once a symbol of escape and relaxation, had become forever tied to a nightmare that no one could forget. As news spread of Daniel's capture, the community tried to grapple with the incomprehensible. How could a man who had seemed ordinary, dependable and loving, carry out such horrific acts and then disappear into the wilderness? The answers would come slowly through investigation and trial, but the shock, grief, and fear left by his actions would remain etched in the minds of everyone who had once admired the Jackson family. The aftermath of the Jackson family tragedy left the small town in shock. Neighbors whispered in disbelief, trying to reconcile the image of Daniel Jackson, the dependable father and husband, with the horrors he had committed. The cabin, once a place of laughter and family bonding, remained sealed off by police tape, a silent monument to the lives that had been stolen. News crews arrived from across the state, capturing the forested mountains, the calm lake, and the cabin that had become a symbol of unimaginable violence. Residents struggled to process what had happened, haunted by the realization that such darkness could hide behind a seemingly ordinary face. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the final days of the Jackson family. Forensic experts examined every corner of the cabin, cataloging evidence and documenting the crime scene with meticulous detail. Emma's note, small and innocent, was preserved as a chilling clue to the events that had unfolded. Psychologists and criminal profilers were brought in to study Daniel's behavior, attempting to understand how a man who had appeared normal could commit such an act. Their reports painted a portrait of a man consumed by suppressed anger, distorted perceptions of love, and sudden impulses triggered by fear and frustration. The community struggled with grief and disbelief. Families avoided the roads near the cabin, children asked difficult questions their parents could not answer, and the local school held counseling sessions to help students cope with the shock. The Jacksons' friends tried to offer support, but even the closest loved ones found themselves haunted by the same question: how could someone they trusted completely turn into a killer? Emma's courage in writing the note, her innocent attempt to prevent tragedy, became both a heartbreaking symbol and a reminder of the vulnerability of innocence in the face of evil. Daniel was charged with multiple counts of murder, and the trial became a national sensation. Details of the crime, note, and the events leading up to the cabin massacre were presented with clinical precision, horrifying spectators and fueling media coverage. Psychologists testified about the dangerous mix of internalized rage, distorted thinking, and impulsive behavior that had led to the murders. Friends and family struggled with mixed emotions, attempting to understand a man who had once been their neighbor, their friend, and their family member, now revealed as capable of unimaginable violence. Even after Daniel's conviction, the town remained scarred. The mountains and the lake, once symbols of peaceful retreats and summer vacations, carried a permanent weight of memory. The Jacksons' home remained empty, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictability of human behavior. People would talk about the family and the tragedy for years, recounting the story to strangers as a cautionary tale of hidden darkness behind ordinary appearances. Emma's note, intended to save her family, became a symbol of innocence, hope and the human desire to reach those we love, even in moments of fear. Yet it also became a reminder that sometimes, even the most heartfelt warnings cannot prevent tragedy when darkness has already taken root. The Jackson family's story would linger, a chilling testament to how quickly a life of normalcy can unravel, leaving behind grief, questions, and a community forever changed.